Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Joseph Parker has weighed in at a career heaviest of 251 pounds for his fight with Derek Chisora, the rematch taking place in Manchester. Chisora himself, he was 248 pounds, but 251 for Joseph Parker. That is a surprise, because Parker is a guy who has had issues in the past with his gas tank. He actively manages his output in fights, and coming in 10 pounds heavier than the last fight, that is a bit of a red flag. But at the same time, and I'll cover this point first, it is a signal of intent. We've heard all this talk from Joseph Parker about he's going to come in, be more aggressive, be more dominant, start faster, try to trade with Chisora, try to put it on him, not be bullied around. So this, to me, is a signal that he is going to try to follow through with that strategy, that it won't necessarily be the same Joseph Parker that we've seen in recent years, who can, start reasonably well, but then ends up sort of fighting in a pattern that turns ugly and he grounds out and nicks a decision. This, to me, 251 pounds, signals that he does want to go in there and stop Derek Chisora, that he doesn't want it to go 12, that he is looking for a performance and a stoppage to turn people's heads. And let's face it, his career has been a bit flat in recent years. Some ugly performances. The guy has made a career of winning ugly. When you think about Joseph Parker and his best wins, they're generally pretty close, gritty, and he has, in some people's eyes, got decision wins that sometimes are a bit controversial. That maybe the other guy had a shout for winning it, but Parker has ultimately got the decision in most of those wins. So this 251, it's interesting. And the gas tank issue, I guess, is the big question for me, because Derek Chisora is a guy who obviously is an older fighter and has had some gas tank issues of his own, still has performed really well, in particular in the first half of fights. It's really been more the second half of fights where he sort of faded quite badly in some recent fights in recent times. If Joseph Parker tries to go to war early with Derek Chisora, even if it is a more educated pressure game that he's going to bring, that he's going to try to counter Chisora, trade with him, hold his feet a bit more, there is some risk in that. But also, Derek Chisora, his chin is probably going to be better in the first part of the fight than the later part of the fight. And if Joseph Parker is starting fast and he starts to fade, well, it could get quite interesting. And Parker's gas tank has always been a little bit of a question, because since he gassed against Carlos Takam in 2015, and he really let his hands go in a sequence of about 20 odd punches or whatever it was, gassed badly, and then Carlos Takam put it on him. Since then, we haven't quite seen Parker go all out in fights. And maybe it's as people have pointed out in this past week in different comments in response to things that I've said, maybe it is the ghost of that Carlos Takam fight that has put in Parker's mind and ingrained it that he does need to manage his energy. And we've seen that in a lot of his recent fights. And if you've followed the channel for any length of time, I've described it as, for certain parts of fights, between say round 6, round 9, round 10, he's almost in an energy conservation mode. He knows the fight is 12 rounds, or if it's 10 rounds, whatever. He is fighting within himself to make sure that he's got energy for the later rounds so he can actually see it through and not be in trouble. And he does kind of just go into this mode, and it's just fighting within himself, often a lot of circling, a bit of jabbing. But if he's coming in at 251 and he's looking to start faster, be more aggressive, expending a lot of energy, and remembering, Joseph Parker isn't a guy that works for 3 minutes of a round. So being an extra 10 pounds heavier from that last fight where he was 241 and now he's 251, it's a bit of a red flag, because he's going to need to really put it on Chisora early. And if he's going to try to take him out in those sort of first 6 rounds or so, remembering he said he thought a knockout might come between round 6 and 10. There is still the question about managing his activity, because he doesn't have massive one-punch power. He hasn't got a knockout at world level. So to come and to try to say that he's going to spark out Derek Chisora, he comes in heavier. Well, it shows the intent that he's going to try to follow through with that. But he have those energy reserves to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep active? Because one of the things that I think he needs to do with Derek Chisora, because Chisora himself takes rounds off, he does, especially in the second half of fights, his activity drops hugely. In those instances, Parker needs to be able to work when Chisora doesn't want to. But being heavier, and also bear in mind, we've seen this before. Back in the sort of 2016, 2017, Kevin Barry, his trainer at the time, openly spoke about that they were trying to build his body, trying to get more power, and they actively had him trying to come in around the mid-240s. So what we had was the Dillian White fight, the Andy Ruiz fight at 2016, Razvan Kajanu 2017, Hughie Fury 2017, in the mid-240s. So Ruiz 246, 245, 245 for the Kajanu and Fury fights for Joseph Parker. But after those fights, they abandoned the strategy because Parker wasn't getting some of those gains that they thought he would get. They talked about trying to build up his body and his legs to get more power, but there was no noticeable increase in power or effectiveness in the ring from Joseph Parker. But what we did see when he was in the mid-240s was he actually looked a little bit slow in terms of his hand speed. His timing looked a little bit off. It just wasn't quite clicking. So they gave it 3 fights, and although he won those 3 fights, certainly there was a little bit of controversy in terms of the decision. I mean, this is sort of Joseph Parker all over his career. He's made a career of winning fights that aren't necessarily super entertaining, nicking scorecards, say the Ruiz Jr. fight, even that Hughie Fury fight, that was a majority decision, but it's not like he dominated to the point where you were just like, wow, it was so clear, he was just putting it on these guys, that sort of stuff. But the Razvan Kajanu fight, it was, even though at short notice, because Hughie Fury had pulled out, a lot of people looked at that and were like, should have done better with this guy who was a sparring partner, and he couldn't even put a dent in him. Although he, basically blitzed him and won every single round. People were expecting a stoppage. And Parker, since that fight, has always been talking about a knockout. He's going to go in there and knock people out. It hasn't happened at anything approaching world level. But if you're coming in at 251, your opponent is a guy who is strong, relatively durable, especially in the earlier part of fights, and is a guy who's effective in fights in that first half. You're giving him some opportunities. So it's going to be interesting, because if Joseph Parker expends quite a bit of energy earlier in the fight, is he going to be able to have a second wind? Is he going to be able to keep up the pace, keep it on Chisora, especially at the heavier weight? Or is this all going to be moot, that he is going to stop Derek Chisora at a certain point in this fight, and that the extra weight means he's got extra power, extra muscle? I mean, I know that's the theory, but we've sort of, it hasn't really panned out when they've tried this before with Joseph Parker. But this is obviously a new trainer, Andy Lee. He's been with Parker for 2 camps now. The first one was about 5 weeks. This has been a full camp. They've been together the best part of 2021. So it's going to be interesting to see if this pans out, because it feels like a red flag, especially with gas tank issues for Parker. Is he going to be able to get the job done? Is this weight going to be a help or a hindrance? Let me know. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.